Welcome to this segment from the Europe's Innovation Gap: Why the EU Trails the US and East Asia in Tech series. To make this deep dive more accessible, I've broken the full video into smaller, focused chapters. If you're interested in the full story, from overregulation to the rise of unicorn startups, you can find the complete video on my channel. Today, we are talking about Chapter 5, Comparative Case Studies and Data. How does Europe really stack up against the US and Asia in hard numbers? Let's crunch the data.
Comparative case studies and data, the EU versus US and Asia by the numbers.
Let's pause the narrative for a moment and look directly at some key metrics where Europe trails the US and East Asia. These concrete comparisons serve as mini case studies of the innovation gap. In the race for innovation, South Korea and Israel are the world's top R&D spenders relative to their economies, each investing over 4% of GDP. The United States sits around 3.4 to 3.5%, and Japan about 3.3%. China, despite its rapid rise, is at roughly 2.4%, but climbing yearly. Now, where is the EU 27 bloc? As of 2021, the EU's R&D investment was only about 2.1% of GDP. Recent estimates put it around 2.2%, better than a decade ago, when it was around 1.8 to 2.0%, but still well short of the EU's own 3% target and behind other advanced economies. In absolute terms, the US spends roughly $800+ billion on R&D annually. China about USD 606.7 billion, and the entire EU around USD 474 billion PPP adjusted. The gap in intensity means that even Europe's strong economies like Germany or France underinvest relative to their size. Germany does about 3.1% of GDP thanks to its industrial R&D base. France about 2.2%. While the US outinvests even the top EU nations when national GDP is considered. This shortfall represents tens of billions of euros less each year going into innovation in Europe compared to a scenario where it matched US levels. Over time, that's a massive cumulative disadvantage in new technology development. What this means? Europe is simply not putting as much of its resources into creating the next big things. Government budgets are constrained and businesses aren't filling the gap sufficiently. So Europe risks perpetually playing catch-up in critical fields: AI, quantum computing, biotech, green tech, because others are investing more heavily. We can think of R&D as the seed planting for future breakthroughs. And Europe is sowing fewer seeds per acre than its competitors. We've discussed it qualitatively. Now the numbers. In 2022, total venture capital investment was roughly United States, about USD 230 billion, Asia, excluding China, around USD 80 to 90 billion with India rising. China, about USD 70 billion. China's VC can swing due to policy changes. Europe, about USD 85 billion, record high, but still around a third of the US. These figures fluctuate year to year, but the pattern holds that the US alone often equals or exceeds the rest of the world combined in VC. Europe, even combined as a continent, is far behind the US in this metric. On a per capita basis, Americans invest several times more venture money in startups than Europeans do. Now, unicorn count. As of 2023, US, about 700 unicorns, about 50 to 55% of global unicorns. China, about 250 unicorns, 20 to 25% of global. Europe, EU plus UK, around 130 unicorns, roughly 10 to 12% of global. India, about 70 unicorns. India has surged in recent years. Rest of world, about 50 unicorns. Europe's share of about 10% aligns with that earlier stat that around 8–10% of global unicorns are European. Europe's population and GDP are about 5 to 6% of the world, so one could argue it's punching slightly above its weight in unicorn count globally. But given the wealth and talent in Europe, one might expect it to host far more, closer to the US and China. The fact that tiny Singapore has a couple of dozen unicorns, or that Israel, 9 million people, has more unicorns than most EU countries, highlights that it's not just size that matters, but ecosystem. For example, Israel's tech ecosystem, often called Startup Nation, has thrived due to massive R&D spending, over 4% of GDP, military tech spin-offs and strong VC links, offering a case study that high innovation output is possible outside the US or China if conditions are right. We also have platform tech companies as a metric. As mentioned, out of the top 100 digital platforms or tech firms by market value, the US had 41, China 28, for a combined of 69. Europe had only a handful. In fact, a specific stat: only 4 of the world's top 50 technology companies are European, and none in the top 10. That underscores Europe's almost negligible presence at the highest echelons of tech. Think FAANG, BAT, etc. None are European. Innovation can also be gauged by patents and scientific output. Europe actually does well in traditional patent metrics. The European Patent Office, EPO, sees many filings from European companies, and countries like Germany and France consistently rank in top patent filers globally, often after US, China, Japan, and Korea. However, in emerging tech areas, Europe often lags. In artificial intelligence patents, studies have shown the US and China each account for a large share. China leads in sheer volume of AI patent filings, though quality is debated, whereas Europe's share is much smaller. In 5G telecommunications patents, European firms, Nokia, Ericsson, did contribute significantly alongside Chinese, Huawei, ZTE, and some US Korean players, an area where Europe had legacy strength. But sustaining that lead into 6G and beyond will require continued heavy R&D. In green tech, renewables, EVs, Europe has strong companies, like Denmark's Vestas in wind or various automotive EV efforts, yet China has taken a massive lead in areas like solar panel production and EV battery tech. Europe pioneered solar tech but lost manufacturing to Asia. It excelled in automotive engineering but was caught off guard by the EV wave, now playing catch-up to Tesla and Chinese EV makers. So even where Europe starts ahead, thanks to a strong science base, it sometimes fails to capitalize commercially. A European Commission report noted this paradox. Europe produces as many or more scientific publications than the US or China, and even high-quality publications at comparable rates. But when it comes to market outcomes, like new products, companies, etc., Europe falls short. For example, European researchers contributed heavily to mRNA vaccine science, CureVac, BioNTech, etc. But it took a partnership with US pharma, Pfizer with BioNTech, to bring a leading COVID vaccine to the global market quickly. This shows Europe's innovation pipeline often needs external boost to fully deliver. Another telling data point. In 2023, of the top 50 global universities by research excellence, 21 were in the US, 21 in China, and only 4 in Europe, and none of those 4 were in the EU. This speaks to how China has rapidly built world-class research institutions, while Europe's are stagnant in rankings. The top ones in Europe are usually Oxford, Cambridge, ETH, Zurich, UK, Swiss, and perhaps one like Imperial or a French école. University strength correlates with innovation in the long run, producing talent and ideas. Europe's brainpower is strong, but the best often cluster in the US or, now increasingly, China. Summary of the stats. Europe is trailing on most quantitative measures of innovation: R&D spending, venture funding, number of tech giants, unicorns, cutting-edge patent leadership. It performs well in foundational areas like scientific publications and some engineering fields, but struggles to convert that into economic impact and global tech leadership. These case studies highlight that the gap is real and measurable. However, numbers alone don't capture everything. Europe still excels in certain niches. For example, luxury automotive, advanced manufacturing, some areas of pharma, fintech regulations, etc. But in the overarching domain of digital and high-tech innovation, the story told by the data is one of persistent lagging. After seeing these comparisons, the big question is, what can be done? Is Europe destined to always be a follower in tech, or can it reclaim its former position as a global innovator, as it was in the eras of chemical, electrical, and early computing innovations? If you found this chapter interesting, consider watching the full deep dive, where I cover everything from Europe's startup gap to case studies comparing the EU, US, and Asia. You'll find the link in the description. And hey, if you like this kind of content, smash that like button, subscribe for more deep dives, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Cheers, and see you in the next one.